All right, and joining me on the phone now, very excited about this guest, former head coach at the University of Maryland, 2002 national champion, 2 Final Fours. Gary Williams is on the phone. Coach, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Well, I appreciate you joining me for a few minutes. And, what I would just kind of start by asking is, how you holding up in this time? I mean, it's obviously an unprecedented time. We've never seen anything like this before. At least I certainly haven't. How you holding up? How's your family? I hope everything's okay down in Maryland.
Yeah, we're fine. Family's fine. Maryland's one of those hot areas. I think the East Coast has taken the brunt of it so far. And everybody's trying to stay healthy, do the right thing. You have a lot of people cooperating, trying to do what's right. So as long as that continues, I think we can be in pretty good shape. So I feel fine and looking forward to all this to be over. And hopefully it'll be over soon.
Absolutely. And, on a little bit of a lighter note, it has allowed a lot of people a lot of time that they never envisioned having. I know, obviously, I assume you have friends and family in the area, but, outside of maybe spending more time with family, I mean, anything fun? I mean, have you picked up any new TV shows? What are you doing to pass the time?
Just trying to stay busy, reading more probably than usual. I like to play golf. In the state of Maryland, all the golf courses are closed, so you can't do that, and I miss that. But walk a lot and watch some more TV. I like The Office. It's a chance to watch more episodes of that. And a new one is Ozark. I think a lot of people are watching that for the first time, just on that Netflix. And, watching that's pretty different, really, and it's a lot of fun.
Where are you in Ozark? I just finished the second season. Like you, I had been wanting to watch it, been waiting to watch it, and I started with this quarantine. My wife and I just finished season 2. Where are you at in the show?
Still in the first season. Just started watching it, really, and it's one of those things. It's kind of. It keeps you interested, I think, and that's the big thing now. Everybody's looking for things to stay interested with, and it's different. It's not your typical thing that you see on normal television. So I think that's the appeal for me anyway.
Fantastic. I did want to talk to you just about the years at Maryland. And, one of the things about this time is it gives me an opportunity to track down a guy like you who's busy, who maybe doesn't have a ton of time during the regular school year or calendar year or whatever, and just kind of talk about some of your time there, because obviously you guys had an incredible program, 7 Sweet 16s in 10 years, 2 Final Fours, a national championship. And I do want to kind of get into some of the nuance of it, but, when you look back on your time at the university, and I know you still work there, I mean, what are some of the best memories? Obviously, I know winning a national championship tops it, but what are your memories about your 15, 20, 25 years now associated with the university, and even more because you played there many years ago?
Well, I think I was at the Ohio State University, and it's one of the really good jobs. And 1989, the Maryland job opened up, and they had gone through some tough times. Len Bias had died a couple of years before. They had some problems within the program there, and I had gone to Maryland, played basketball there back in the 60s. So that's the only reason I really left Ohio State. That was really too good of a job to leave. That's one of those jobs where you could stay there 25 years and be very happy coaching there. So coming to Maryland, the toughest thing for me was to get over the fact that I probably, if you looked at it just from a distance, it was a mistake to leave Ohio State to go to Maryland because of the situation there. We couldn't. It came out with sanctions my first year there from the previous couple of years, and we couldn't play in the NCAA for 2 years. We had to sit out all live TV for 1 year. We lost 3 scholarships, had to give back quite a bit of money. So it wasn't a good atmosphere. The school, the university was really disappointed in the basketball program. They felt that it hurted, maybe it hurt a little bit academically, how you're perceived by your sports programs, whatever. So it was the toughest 3-4 years there of my coaching career, because we were trying to play in the Atlantic Coast Conference, which at the time Duke and Carolina, as typical Duke and Carolina teams, they were really good. Wake Forest obviously was good. Virginia, there was no easy teams. 6 out of the 8 teams were ranked in the top 25 my first year there. So, you have to deal with that. And I didn't see a way out for a while. It's not like you're going to leapfrog those programs, because they're all really good programs. We had to figure out a way where first we could get competitive, and that was my first goal, was just trying to get competitive. And the good thing with the good teams, like at Carolina and Duke, you could look at them and see what they do to be so good. And, they were the ones you tried to emulate. You tried to be like them, and I'm sure that helped us in our recovery period.
So first of all, I would ask, it's so fascinating. You mentioned NCAA sanctions, and, I think that I've heard this in other places, but I don't even think they do. I know for a fact they don't do the no TV deal anymore. How crippling is that to recruiting efforts, to everything? Because even if you have a good product on the floor, and I don't necessarily know, that you would say that you did at that time, but I feel like it'd be hard to recruit if you're playing Duke and nobody can watch it. If you're playing Carolina, nobody can watch it. Everybody, a lot of programs go through scholarship reductions at certain points, but I feel like the TV thing is so unique, and like I said, it's something the NCAA doesn't even do anymore.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, players at the ACC level, they want to go where they get recognition, where they get exposure, because a lot of those guys are thinking about playing in the NBA right or wrong. They still really believe that during the recruiting process. That's a big part of their decision is, if I go to X school, will that help me get to the next level, get to the NBA? And exposure that they expected when you go to a major conference. So we're very fortunate in the fact that we're in a good basketball area here at Maryland, and local recruiting, you might not be able to get the best player coming out of here locally in the Maryland, Virginia area, DC area, but you can get a really good player, and that's what we did to survive those years. And it gave us, by the time we got off the sanctions and played another year, we were able to get a good recruiting class. Johnny Rhodes, Twain Simpkins, X-Ray Hip. Those 3 guys started as sophomores the next year with Joe Smith and Keith Futh. And, that 2004 year, that was the year that really got us going.
You mentioned trying to just to try to get competitive before you can get competitive. And I know you just mentioned being able to bring in that key recruiting class. What were the steps to try to get competitive during an era where, as you said, the ACC top to bottom was as good as it had ever been?
Yeah, I think you had to sell. We spent a lot of time. I spent a lot of time speaking at different things. You had to get out there and get into the fraternities, sororities, all the activities on campus. You had to make the students, I think the key was to get the students involved, because, when Lefty Rizal there, when he was rolling really good, the students are really involved. We had a great place to play in Colt Fieldhouse. And so if we could get the students back into Colt Fieldhouse, they usually get everybody else excited. In other words, the donors, the boosters to the program, they had kind of gone away. And so it was up to us to make Colt Fieldhouse a great place to play, which wasn't that hard to do, but you had to get people back in the seats. And I had a great player in Walt Williams who kept us entertaining. Walt was a great player. He still has the ACC record. He scored 30-plus points in 8 straight games in ACC games, and that was very difficult to do because we didn't have many players with Walt that could score at that type of level. So there was a lot of things that we were able to do that required, the help of a lot of people. And, that was the big thing, was just to get people back into the program because they had been there before. It wasn't like, it hadn't been done before. You had to get people back, and I think that was the key.
What was there a moment? I mean, and I'm looking at kind of some history here. Like I said, for people who don't know, and I think it's an incredible run that is underappreciated historically. But 7 Sweet 16s in a 10-year stretch, starting in '93, '94 through 2002, 2003. Was there a moment where you did feel like, one, you're either getting competitive, you are competitive, you've turned a corner? I mean, what was maybe that 1 or 2 moments that really felt like, okay, this thing is in fact trending in the right direction?
Well, the 2003, I guess it was, we only won, I think it was 3 league games in the ACC, and but we had a good freshman class that took their lumps. They had to play, and sometimes that's good. You have to go out in the court. You're going to get beat, but at the same time, if you're a good player, you learn and you get better and you get tougher, and that's what 2003 was. And so 2004, we started 2 sophomores and 3 freshmen, and our first game of the year was against Georgetown, and Georgetown was nationally ranked, and they had Othell Harrington. Of course, John Thompson had done such a good job with the Georgetown program, and we played them at their arena at the old Capitol Center, and we were able to win that game in overtime, and it just happened to be Friday after Thanksgiving, and we were the only game on national television, and I think that game really showed people that we could play at a national level again and be successful. And from there, we got good. But it took, I think that win in that game really got us off on the right foot that year, but also to get us back to where we thought we belonged as a program.
You had obviously a lot of good players at that time. One guy that I kind of forgot about, and I remember Joe Smith, number 1 overall pick. I forgot about Steve Francis, Stevie Franchise. I mean, I was doing some reading on him and his backstory, and he had kind of a wild backstory. Unfortunately, he had some tragedy early in his life and kind of bounced around high schools, junior college. But how did he end up at Maryland? Because, I mean, outside of maybe Juan Dixon, I would think that he was probably right up there as kind of the most iconic players that played for you.
Yeah, Steve was so talented. I mean, he was just a very talented player. He grew up Tacoma Park, which is like 6 miles from the Maryland campus, and so we were aware of him growing up. As you said, both his parents passed during the time he was in high school, and he kind of drifted around a little bit. He had some people that really cared about him. They got him to junior college, and he played junior college. In his last year in junior college, he was up at Allegheny, which is only about an hour and a half in Maryland from us. And so it was a matter of, making Steve see the benefit for himself. But, obviously that really helped our program to get a Steve Francis, but also for Steve to really, as a player locally, to get that type of attention that he did get, because he was kind of an urban legend, his first couple of years before he came to Maryland. He'd play in the summer leagues around town and score 60 and things like that. And Steve was one of the good guys to coach. He really worked hard. He was a team player. And, I thought that team that he played on was good enough to really go in the NCAA program. We got to the Sweet 16 and lost to St. John's to Ron Artest. But about 2 weeks earlier, we had lost our center, Abina Kesey, who played the NBA for 6 years. He tore his Achilles tendon, and so we would have been tough enough and strong enough with Abina in the middle there, I thought, to do a better job against St. John's, but they really took it to us. And, that was one of the more disappointing losses, and you always hate to lose in the NCAA tournament. But I thought that team was good enough to compete with anybody, and we just had a bad game against St. John's, and they played well, and that was it. But Steve was NBA all rookie team his first year, NBA all-star team his second year, and I think that showed how talented he really was.
Yeah, for people who don't remember Steve Francis, 3-time NBA All-Star, number 2 overall draft. I mean, he was incredibly gifted, especially at a young age. Did you have any moments in practice, like a first practice or even maybe watching him in high school or not AAU, summer league or junior college? I mean, was there ever one moment that you're like, oh my goodness, I've had some good players, but this dude is different?
Yeah, I mean, he did some things. The NBA was on strike that fall, going into December, and we played in Puerto Rico in a tournament down there, and we played, some really good teams, Pittsburgh, Kentucky, and, Steve was just different than everybody else that was in there, and those teams had good players, and he became a highlight film on ESPN every night because he could have these dunks where he'd go over big people and things like that, and there were no NBA highlights, so by the end of the week, unfortunately, I figured that you better enjoy Steve this year because he wasn't going to stay for 2 years as a junior college player, and he wound up going second in the draft that year.
So, as I look back on your time, obviously I remember the 2001 Final Four, which was a precursor to the 2002 National Championship. I didn't realize, because you guys had been, you had a lot of marquee games that year, but you guys really struggled that year. So how about that 2001 season? You guys make the school's first Final Four, but I didn't realize that throughout the regular season there were some real kind of ups and downs with that team.
We were playing pretty well. We were a little young. We played Duke in Cole Fieldhouse in just a great game.
Yeah.
We were up 10 with a minute left, and Steve Blake played the NBA for 13 years, fouled out, and it exposed us. We didn't really have a backup point guard, a natural point guard at that time. And so when Steve fouled out with a minute left, Jay Williams hit 3 threes to get the game into overtime. We missed 2 fronts of one-on-ones, but you have to make your free throws down the stretch in those games, and we wound up losing in overtime. And it really shook us. There was no doubt about it. We did not, we lost knowing how to win, which we didn't play that badly, but we just couldn't get over the top. And we weren't playing easy teams. I mean, we were in league play at that time. So I think we finally won a game at NC State. We lost 3 or 4 league games in a row, and that got us on the right track. And then our next game, we won at Duke on Duke senior night, and that gave us back whatever conference we needed to go play. And that year, we played Duke 4 times. We lost in overtime at Cole, beat them at Cameron, then lost on the tip-in at the buzzer in the ACC tournament. And, we had a big lead in the first half against Duke in the Final Four, and we're still up, I think, 10 or 11 at halftime. And, Lonnie Baxter fouled out with about 3 minutes left in the 2-point game in a very controversial call. And, they won the game, and, they won the national championship. They beat Arizona the next game. So it was a great Duke team. I thought we were really good. And it was the first time Maryland had ever been to the Final Four in the history of the basketball program. And so, coming from where we did, I was very proud of that team.
I forgot you guys played 4 times that year. We hear all the time, right? This narrative, it's hard to beat a team 3 times in a year. And I think we as fans, whenever you have 2 really good teams in a league, whether it is Duke, Carolina, Kentucky, Tennessee a couple years ago when both teams were really good, Arizona, UCLA, you hope for the opportunity to play 3, maybe 4 times. What is it like? At what point, like when you get to the Final Four, is there anything new? Is there any are you just like, dude, we know everything they do, they know everything we do, and let's just kind of put on the gloves and go in for a fight? Because I feel like once you play a team for a 4th time already in conference play where you're playing them twice a year, I feel like there's not really that much that you can do in a scout or an advance or anything like that, if that makes sense.
No, I mean, it's you're both going to put what you do out in the court, because you're not going to make. If you got to the Final Four, then you played pretty well, and
Sure.
You're not going to make big changes. And Duke was always pretty basic. They always played great defense. Basically got the ball to the right guys. They had Battier, Jay Williams were the big scorers back then, and so they knew what they were doing, obviously. And we had gotten to be pretty good ourselves by then. We had gotten our confidence back, and we had a Lonnie Baxter, a Juan Dixon, people like that, Steve Blake that could really play. So it was always, let's go. And the best thing about those games, they were all great games. That there wasn't a blowout in any of those games. And it was just a matter of, what team really shot it well down the stretch a lot of times. And it wasn't so much as, anybody gave anybody the game. It was basically, you took the games that you won. And to Duke's credit, they came back, like I said, from a big deficit. But, we weren't 20 points better than Duke. Nobody was. They won a national championship. And so, reality was going to set in, and you hope you're good enough to win in the second half, and we just weren't good enough. We had a couple things go against us, and, you got to be able to handle that. But I think that made us tougher, going into 2002, the realization that, we had an opportunity. We didn't get it, but you have to be a little lucky, but hopefully you get back to the Final Four the next year. We had a lot of those guys back. We lost two really good players off for 2001, Terrence Morris, who played in the NBA, and Danny Miller, who transferred to Notre Dame after that year.
And you mentioned a minute ago kind of the game at Cole Fieldhouse where, you guys, we know what happened, 10-point deficit for Duke in the closing minutes, forced overtime, whatever. And you said it took a while for your guys to bounce back from that loss. Obviously, it's completely different going into an offseason. The roster changes a little bit, all that stuff. Did you feel like it took a while for your guys to build up that confidence going into 2002, or was it more of like a chip on their shoulder in the sense that they knew they were good enough to beat them? I mean, they did it at Cameron Indoor. Was there any confidence lost or anything following that Final Four loss, or was it more like we got to get back here and win these next two games?
Yeah, I felt that I was worried at first because Maryland had never been to a Final Four before, so that was a great accomplishment. So the guys who were coming back, I was concerned that they would feel that way, that, well, we did accomplish something that was never done before, so that's a pretty good legacy. Gave them 2 weeks off after Final Four in 2001, and within a week on their own, they were back in a room lifting, and, just had that, attitude that we were going to try to get back and have a chance to win the thing the next year. And we were really good. We had a very good basketball team, but, at the same time, nobody's going to give you anything. And in fact, we played in Madison Square Garden against Arizona, who had lost to Duke in the championship game the year before. They still had Arenas and Walton and, some really good players. And, they beat us. And, if we needed a wake-up call, that was it. And from there, we were really good. And, we got better as the year went on, which is the key. We had great depth. We had Chris Wilcox and Lonnie Baxter up front, two guys started in the NBA. I think Chris played 11 years, and Baxter played 6 or 7, and Steve Blake in the backcourt played 13. Juan Dixon played 7, and Juan was, I thought, the best player in college basketball that year. He was ACC Player of the Year, MVP of the Final Four, Maryland's all-time leading scorer. And they gave the Wooden Award to Jay Williams, and Juan had beaten out Jay Williams for the ACC Player of the Year award. So Juan was a great player, and we were ready to go. And I think our players sensed it. I sensed it. That was just probably as positive as we could be when we started practice that year, because as long as we continue to work hard, because no matter how good you are in October, you have to get better during the year, because all the good teams do that. And we worked hard enough, and we had a great second team in practice to push the first team, which helped us get better during the season.
Yeah, and I was going to kind of ask that, it sounds like the guys were locked in, ready to go, but how different is it for a coach, for a locker room, for a staff, for a team when there is that expectation? You had plenty of good teams that had plenty of high expectations, but to get to the Final Four, to return so many guys, how different do you feel as a coach in the offseason, and not even necessarily just that 2002 season? How do you feel as a coach? Because it is a lot different than being young or losing guys as opposed to coming back. You are, in the eyes of some, the team to beat nationally, in the eyes of some, the team to beat in the ACC. Whatever the case is it a different deal, and how do you kind of maintain or handle it with your team?
Yeah, we were confident. I don't think we were overconfident, but we were confident that we could win. I was confident, probably as confident as any coach, and we knew we were good enough. And then that's the key. I think you have to have that confidence. In other words, you can set all the goals you want to set, but unless you're confident, and it's got to be true confidence, you have to have the ability to measure your confidence, and we did. We were a very strong team, and that's what you're looking for. And then the biggest thing, you talk about that all the time, Coach, about being unselfish, but we were really unselfish. I mean, we had one guy that was, lights out that year in Juan Dixon, but the other four guys, Byron Mouton was our fifth starter on that team, and four of those guys played the NCAA. Byron could have. He played overseas 10 years, but he didn't get with the right team, which unless you're a great player, that has a lot to do with your success as an NBA player sometimes. And so we took it upon ourselves. It was a very easy team to coach because players kind of pleased each other, made sure nobody screwed up off the court, and then on the court, we really were an unselfish team. We went into the NCAA tournament in 2002 with the most assists of any team in the country.
Wow.
And, that's the way we played. And we played like that during the NCAA tournament, and that allowed us to be champions.
And I was going to say, how does it feel to get back on that stage? You've talked about already where the program was when you got there. I mean, that was now a decade plus before, but you take the school to the first Final Four. I know that's a great stepping stone, but you want to win those next two games. You actually do get back. Your guys do fulfill kind of the preseason prophecy. Just take us into that moment in what I believe was Atlanta, the Georgia Dome. I could be wrong on that, but just when you did win the championship in 2002.
Yeah, we getting back there, it was hard. We were in a region. We had to beat Kentucky and Connecticut, and Tayshaun Prince was from Kentucky, and Connecticut had
Caron Butler, right?
Just great players. So, we knew that we would have to play hard. And they were our two toughest games, the region at Syracuse and the Dome up there, and we really grinded it against Kentucky, and then Connecticut was just a great team. They had great players. We had great players. And obviously, Jim Calhoun knew what he was doing, and we were able to get the W.
And you get to Atlanta, or you get to the Final Four. How good did it feel? I mean, when the confetti's falling on you, you guys have done what you wanted to do, what your program has wanted to do for 15 years. What is the first memory that comes to mind when I ask you about that night?
Well, that night was really special. Like I said, we had played in Madison Square Garden in November. That was like 2 months after 9/11, and everything that was going on in New York City then. And you really got a feel for, what our country was like, how we're trying to recover. And then we go to Atlanta to play in the championship game, and they had some firemen and policemen from New York walk out in the court with the flag from the Twin Towers.
Wow.
And it was an incredible moment. Even given the platform of the national championship game, you're still caught up in that emotion at the start of the game. And in the Final Four, we had three teams in there in Kansas, Indiana. Those two teams were used to winning. They had won multiple national championships, and we had to make sure that we felt that we still belonged there. In other words, that because of their heritage, because of the success they had, and we didn't have a national championship, we still could win the game. So when we won, it was just a great feeling, obviously, but at the same time, it gives you a chance to think. And I remember, the couple of minutes before we got up on the stage for One Shining Moment and the presentation of the award, that I started as JV high school coach in Camden, New Jersey, Woodrow Wilson High School. And I'll never forget that. You know, I was so happy to be a high school coach and so glad and fortunate for the opportunity just to be a coach and to go from there to all of a sudden winning a national championship. It just seemed like it went very quickly in between those two things. And, you know, so many people help you along the way. You have great players, obviously, great assistant coaches, and, you know, you do everything yourself you can do to get there, but there's no guarantees. Great coaches that, you know, haven't won a national championship, and so you appreciate the moment.
You know, one of the things that I didn't realize, and I've mentioned this stat a few times, but 7 Sweet 16s over a 10-year stretch, and I don't think that I realized how consistently good you guys were regular season, conference tournament, NCAA tournament, until really this season when Maryland had a chance to frankly win a national championship, and I went back and I kind of looked through some of the history of the program and all that stuff. Take a fan into how hard is it to maintain that level over a decade, because I don't think fans appreciate how good you guys were and how consistently good you guys were from the mid-'90s to the mid-2000s.
Well, when you're in a metropolitan area like the D.C. area, you have a lot of pro teams, and so it's not like being in Kansas or Tobacco Road or places like that where, you know, you're the whole show, basically, for your fans or whatever. There's a lot of options in this area. So unless you're good, you know, you quickly lose some interest from the media, from, you know, things like that. But if you're in an area where you're the only show in town, obviously, you know, they're going to help you. They're going to keep promoting the program, no matter if you have an off year or whatever. So I think, you know, we were consistent. People at times didn't realize how hard it was to get to the Sweet 16, you know, and so, you know, you just keep working. You can't let that get to you. You've got to keep working really hard. And, you know, and you play in a good league. In other words, even a year after we went to the Final Four, we were still picked behind Duke and Carolina.
Wow.
In the ACC for 2002. And that's just part of the deal back then, that decade, where we went to those Sweet 16s, it was like nobody could be better than Duke and Carolina. So you had to overcome that. And you know, that would seep into your fans, too. You know, you lose a game and they go, well, here we go again. We're not as good as, you know, those teams or whatever. So there was some things you had to fight, but that's okay. It was, you know, I never looked at coaching as anything that was supposed to be easy. It was never, you know, supposed to be, you know, completely smooth or anything like that. So it's kind of like we are at the University of Maryland. You know, we're in a, you know, a great area that's competitive, you know, in every aspect of the country. And so that was us, you know, and I really enjoyed that time coaching.
And one of the things that stands out to me, you mentioned Duke and Carolina, and we all understand why Maryland had to leave the ACC. Do you miss those games? I think the casual college basketball fan, especially one of a certain age, probably over the age of 30, remembers Duke, Maryland, Carolina, Maryland, Virginia, Maryland. We all understand why Maryland made the move to the Big Ten. Any times that you just watch an old tape or you see a clip or a highlight that you say, man, I miss going against Coach K, or I miss going against Dean Smith, Roy Williams, things like that?
Well, I think a couple things happened nationally. You know, conferences, you know, expanded. You know, obviously the ACT really broke up the Big East because of all the football teams went to the ACC. So at the time we were, you know, I had only coached in the ACC by the time I got out of there in 2011. We're still in the ACC, and then of course they went, I think it was 2014, but I think our fans, you know, forgot sometimes we wouldn't play Duke and Carolina twice a year anymore because of expansion.
Sure.
Carolina and Duke always looked at each other, and rightly so, as their biggest rivals. We had it, you know, those 2-3 years with Duke. You know, they became huge games, the highest rated games on television. But you know, it was just those couple of years, and you know, they were great games. Once we got good enough to create rivalries, the games with Carolina and Duke were great, and you miss them. There's no doubt about it. But at the same time, you know, things have changed. All of a sudden, there's 14 teams in the ACC. We were in financial difficulty in the athletic department at Maryland, and we had an opportunity financially to better ourselves. It's the Big Ten's a great academic conference. A lot of universities the same as Maryland, big research universities, and
Sure.
so it was a pretty good fit for that. And I understand people miss the competition in the ACC, but really, if you pin them down, they were talking about the Duke and Carolina games.
Yeah.
While we were in the ACC, Wake had Chris Paul, they had Tim Duncan, so many great players at NC State, places like that. And yet, the only talk was, the Duke and Carolina games. So, it changed. Change is part of life, I guess. And, Maryland's done very well in the Big Ten Conference. So, there will be rivalries. It takes time to get rivalries, but I think you can see some really good rivalries, and you see Rutgers getting better, in Penn State. So they're the three Eastern teams, including Maryland, and all of a sudden they were three of the better teams in the Big Ten this year.
Absolutely. What did you, just as an observer, what were your thoughts on this past season? I mean, obviously, stuff is out of people's control. We kind of opened this conversation. We'll close here with one or two more questions. But, we kind of opened, this is an unprecedented time. Obviously, there are bigger issues than basketball. We all understand that. There are people losing their lives, and there are people hospitalized, and families losing family members. But from strictly a sports perspective, I mean, what'd you make of Maryland this season? And obviously, I know for the fan base, it was a little bit disappointing because this was probably the best chance in a while to really compete at the highest level on the national stage.
They had a very good year. They tied for first place, just three-way tie. And, the Big Ten was considered the best conference in the country this year by most people. And so, they were right there. And they had two great players. Anthony Callens was a very good senior point guard. You're lucky to have a very good senior point guard. And he played very well, hit big shots. And Jalen Smith, just a sophomore this year, but had really matured from his freshman year and had a great year. So, you never know. With the NCAA tournament this year, it looked like it was wide open. You didn't see that one team, maybe Kansas a little bit, but that was the only team that some people thought may have been better than everybody else. So it would have been wild. It would have been a wide open tournament. And you miss that, but you never know. You can speculate.
Sure.
You can't say Maryland would have done this or would have done that because there's too many teams who are in the same boat. How good would Michigan State be a great tournament team every year? How good would they be in the NCAA tournament? And just things like that. And teams from other conferences that had played well down the stretch. Like a Baylor. All of a sudden, you look at Dayton, maybe their best year since the '60s, and not getting the chance to show how good they were. Just stories like that all over the place. So a lot depends in the NCAA tournament on your draw, on your region. Are teams playing well, even though they might have good record? Every once in a while you can catch a team that's not playing particularly well at the end of the season. And so all those things go into it. So it's great to speculate, and, obviously the passion for your team is there, but at the same time, it's a shame we'll never know.
It sounds like you watch a lot of college. You still watching a lot of college basketball? It seems like you're really plugged into what's going on around the country.
Could you repeat that? You broke up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I said it sounds like you're still watching a lot of college basketball. It seems like you're really plugged in. Are you still watching a lot of basketball back home?
Well, it's funny, when you're coaching, you really only watch the teams that you're going to play. Even in the NCAA tournament, it was about your teams in your region getting ready to play those guys. So now I get a chance to see like Pac-12 and Big 12 and all that type of thing. And it's interesting to compare different areas. For instance, it looks like the Pac-12's have an incredible recruiting season going on, and you look at the Kentuckys, you look at the Dukes, and see what they're doing, and a lot of those teams, they seem to be able to reload every year. So the great thing about college basketball, to me, it never stayed the same. There was always that new team that was going to be good or look good on paper. Can a team sustain it? That's been good for a while. and it's gotten wild, obviously, with the one-and-done thing. And, and the transfer situation has completely changed college basketball. This is probably one of the biggest things, and, what the NCAA is talking about, probably for 21-22, having a player able to transfer one time during their career and be able to play right away. That's going to change the world, and it's going to hurt a lot of programs. It's going to hurt the mid-majors. The kid goes to a mid-major who might have been a good high school player, not great, but all of a sudden after 2 years he grew a couple inches, got stronger, and he's as good as anybody you could recruit coming out of high school. So naturally, the big programs, say the power conferences, are going to go after that kid playing for a mid-major. And so you might not see that mid-major story in the NCAA in the future where all of a sudden they get a great player and they can compete, at least on a one-game basis with the best teams in the country. So, that's the great thing about college basketball. It's never, predictable. A lot of times the NBA, you can pick the top 8 teams in the NBA before the season starts, and you'll have, 8 out of 9 or something like that were there. But there's, nobody picked Dayton to be where they were at the end of the year, for example, this year in the NCAA.
Are there any, obviously, some of your contemporaries are still coaching, and 2 more questions, we'll let you go. Are there any guys that you watch now that, whether it's X's and O, how they build their program, obviously I know Coach K and I know Roy Williams. Are there any either younger guys or guys that you never had the chance to coach against that you really look at and say, I love what that guy does, or I love how his team plays, or anything like that?
Well, I mean, every coach has a favorite style of play. I like to, get out after it. We press probably more than some teams, and we like to run. We scored a lot of points, and, you kind of look toward them. You look at Carolina. Carolina probably run as good a transition after you score. In other words, you score, you better sprint back on defense because Carolina's coming right after you. And that's been Roy Williams, but that goes back to Dean Smith and, all that. And, you look at Mark Few, the job he's done at Gonzaga. He's got that international player influx into his program. He's had it for a while now. They're very difficult to play against. I think the biggest issue for Gonzaga every year is they get into January and February, how they maintain their edge, because really they're only tested a few times during that time in conference play. So, you like that style of play. Michigan State is very aggressive. Izzo teams always come after you defensively, offensively. They're going to look to run. And, I enjoy watching that. And, there's a lot of others. Obviously, Jay Wright's done a great job at going over, playing his style of play. And so you keep watching. In other words, if you were in it for any length of time, coaching in any other way, you would miss not following college basketball. It's been a big part of your life, and so you stay interested, and it keeps you current. And it's good because when somebody throws out a name or a team, at least you've seen them play and have some type of idea of what they're like.
Last question, I'll let you go. You're clearly very you still enjoy the sport, as you just said. It was part of your life for 30, 40, 50 years, whatever it was. I was thinking about this before we got on the phone. You, as you mentioned, retired in 2011. I hate to share a man's age on a broadcast here, but you're about the same age as Coach K, as Jim Boeheim. There are guys that are your contemporaries that are still coaching. Have you ever had any interest? Would you have any interest in coming back? I mean, it just feels like you don't. Age is to use a bad cliche. It feels like age is just a number, and there are guys, your contemporaries that are still doing it at a really high level.
Well, I am around the same age as Boeheim, and who's a good friend also, and Coach K. I think we played 50 games total against each other, and you miss it sometimes and things like that. But every job's different. There's some jobs where the administration in the school, really sets it up where basically you only have to coach. That's your job is to coach and get players in there. But things are going to go your way pretty much. Ours was a little different. We had to work hard. I had 3 ADs my first 5 years at Maryland, which is never good. And things were tough. You had to compete I think it takes it out of you. It'd be nice if you could get a sabbatical year or two in coaching, but it doesn't work that way, because the new guy would come in probably do a better job than you did. So, I'm fortunate. I look at being fortunate. I coached in a great time. I mean, it was, I don't know if there's a golden era of college basketball, but it was certainly a good era that I coached in. And, I was able to coach the teams and coach at great universities. I mean, I coached at Lafayette College, American University, Boston College, Ohio State, and Maryland. And, very few people ever get that opportunity. So I've always felt I went out when I was 67. That was it. I'd coached, close to 50 years, counting everything. And so, I felt that I was very fortunate. And so, sure, you might go out a year or two early, but at the same time, knock on wood, that I've been able to maintain a pretty good lifestyle, healthy, and get a chance to watch my grandkids play basketball, which, I wouldn't get as much chance to do if I was still coaching. So, it's been good.
Very good. Gary Williams, head coach, formerly of Maryland, and as he mentioned, a bunch of other places, 2002 national championship. This is a lot of fun, Coach. I appreciate you making some time. I appreciate you sharing some stories. I think with the situation that everybody's in, I think everybody's looking for kind of fun, different things, and I appreciate you making some time and doing this.
Well, thanks, Aaron. I appreciate it. Thanks for including me. This has been good. It makes you think about a lot of things you don't very often, so it's been enjoyable.
What was the thing that you thought about in the last hour that you maybe haven't thought about in 20 years or 30 years?
It's funny, when we started talking about the championship team, I thought, and I've thought about this before, but we had a great second team. We had Taj Holden was 6'10", about 250. Ryan Randall was 6'6", 270. Drew Nicholas was as good a shooter as I ever coached. He'd come off the bench but play as much as his starters. And people like that made us a great team. And that's, when I refer back to practices, they would beat the first team once in a while in practice. Some of our practices were better than some of our games in terms of the intensity level. So that was a good memory.
Very good. Gary Williams from the University of Maryland, I appreciate the time, and we will speak soon.